is because we have to fight. We have to scrap. But I think God put us in this position at this particular time because we was scrapping and fighting back in the day because we from Brownsville, right? And we know how to scrap and fight. So we could go in there and do what we have to do, but at the same time,
Be lawyers.
be lawyers. How you know where I was going with that one? Right? So we're able to do both because we could go in a room and they're going to say, oh, here they go. But we know the language of the law in order to be able to come up with policy and legislation that will have a direct impact on us as a people in our community, because they're not going to fight for us. When we see all this different development that's happening, it could happen with us or without us.
Hey, good morning and welcome to another edition of The Morning Stretch. I'm your host, Tony Herbert. We're here on Rockaway Avenue in Brownsville, Brooklyn, New York, outside of the offices of Alika Ampry Samuel, City Councilwoman representing the 41st District. We're here to speak with her about a number of issues, including NYCHA, the City Council, and gentrification. Let's go have that conversation. Councilwoman, I'm honored to have this. Well, I'm happy to even say Councilwoman. I remember when you were actually a district leader. For a hot minute, and you did a lot of other stuff in the community, but we're going to get into that. What I want to do is just, set up the tone with regards to you coming out of public housing. You lived here in Brownsville, in Marcus Garvey houses. How's that impacted you with regards to your decision to get into politics?
So first, this is crazy that we sitting here talking,
right?
Because I've known you a very long time.
Right.
So I grew up in Brownsville, grew up in Marcus Garvey houses, and it's when they talk about Brownsville, they just talk about, like, I see it as a very, like, prideful community,
right.
And so I grew up just loving my community,
right.
loving my hood, and so growing up in NYCHA in Brownsville, it's just who I am. So
right.
It's hard to even articulate what that means because it's just my reality, is my existence, is everything that I am, is in my DNA. And so I guess the type of person that I am to the outside, I hope I reflect Brownsville, and I hope I reflect public housing in a very good light, a bright light, a shining light, because I am Brownsville, I am public housing.
Now one would say that Brownsville's second to, or actually first to Coney Island, where I just came from, that it is a economically deprived community. And one would talk about the poverty and crime, and you had to grow up in that atmosphere. Now, you're now the council member representing this community and what have you. What measures are we putting in place, or you're putting in place, to uplift that and bring it to where you need to see your community?
So again, the narrative about Brownsville, or the narrative about public housing, or the narrative about public housing, even in Coney Island or anything or anywhere, is usually poor people, is usually violent people,
right.
or struggling, and we always lacking something. But that's not my reality.
Right.
My reality is a whole lot of families that figure out a way to make it out of nothing. I come from a people where we've always had to struggle, but we've always figured out a way to not just survive but thrive when nobody cared about us.
Right.
And so for me, I'm happy to be in this position of being a council member who represents a people that I come from, because now there's a voice, and now I can change that narrative that we always hear about Brownsville, or public housing communities, or low-income communities, or communities of color. Like that's me.
Well, let's shape that reality, because you can think from a very positive standpoint, because you know what direction you're headed in, so you're focused. Let's look at the individuals that live here in the community. What would they say, or what would you get from them, for the most part, about opportunities that's quasi not being afforded to them because other communities are benefiting, but it doesn't drop on their doorstep? How do you change that dynamic and change that conversation?
So now, it was what I mentioned before, we were just figuring out a way to survive and thrive, right? But because you have a focus on our community, and the focus that we see on our community is not really about helping us as a people, the focus I see is, all right, that's some good land over there. That's a good area over there. We need that area. How do we figure out a way to move over there? So the conversation now turns into, for me and my community and me and my people, is what can we do to make sure that we continue to survive and thrive, stay in this community, not get displaced, and be able to benefit from all of the attention and benefit from all of the resources that's being poured into our community now that we didn't see before. So for me, it's about strategically working with the community so that we could benefit from the good, and I like to say this, Brooklyn or Brownsville could possibly be like the last black and brown community.
Very much so. Well,
And-
they say that about public housing. Public housing is actually the last bastion where black and brown folks live. So if you're going to talk about any voting base from a black community, that's where it's at.
Ooh,
And
oh,
what have you.
absolutely. Yep.
Let me,
That's the key
you know,
part.
in doing my research, quite frankly, I also found a video where you actually spoke to, you know, and I see some portions of it, about a friend who was killed. And actually, Darcel Clark, the Bronx DA, also spoke on our show about a friend of hers that was killed. And recounting those stories about these friends who were murdered, how did that event play into who you are and your choice of profession?
Yeah, so my friend that was killed, her name was Sharon.
Right.
And even though it's
I know, it's
years
still
later,
touching.
right?
It's still touching, yeah.
So it's still touching because Sharon lived in 1590 East New York Avenue. She grew up in Howard Houses. Well, she lived in Howard Houses, and we were 15 years old when she was shot and killed. She was shot in the head. And how that changed my life immediately, Sharon was a member of St. Paul Community Baptist Church, and her funeral was at St. Paul. And I was at her funeral, and after the funeral, all the young kids, all the teenagers from Brownsville went up to the altar at her funeral and gave our lives over to the Lord. Now that's a whole other conversation,
No,
but
that's
that
great.
changed my life
Right.
from the day Sharon was killed at her funeral. And from that day, I realized that I needed to do more in my community, and I needed to be more active and involved in my school.
So walk us through that. Walk us
So-
through
so-
what you started and to get to this
So
point.
I'll say this. It all sound cliche. In school, I started to, get my stuff together
Right.
and do what I was supposed to do. So I was on student council, right? Graduated from high school, went to college, and was on student council in college, right?
Right.
Graduated senior class president of North Carolina A&T. Came home, realized I need to give back to my community, and so I did what? 1998, which is when we met. I was running around with the politicians here in Brownsville.
You and I being confused. Being confused, but okay.
Running around, right? And tried to figure out a place for me to
Right.
be able to use my voice and my lens
Right.
in the space that was needed. And so I worked for the mentally ill homeless. I worked for ACS. And in 2000, I ran for district leader. I was the youngest member of the state committee from Brooklyn to Buffalo, the youngest district leader at that time. But I knew that because of my experiences of being hurt, Sharon, when she was killed, that was only less than 6 months after my father died of a heroin overdose. And my mother and my father were best friends with Sharon and her father, right? And Sharon was buried in the same place my father was buried. And so using that hurt and pain
That was your drive.
was a drive for me, and it continued all the way through. I didn't stop at ACS and being a district leader. I decided to go to law school. It was one of the reasons why I went to CUNY School of Law. It's a public interest law school that has a model of in the service of human need. So everything that I've ever done was because I knew that there was a need for people to be a voice for the marginalized in our society. And that's what also took me to Africa, and that's what brought me back to Brownsville even after Africa. And the reason why I got emotional just now when I thought about Sharon, we just had a shooting last week of a young man who lived in Howard, and his funeral was yesterday.
Yep.
And I spoke to the family in the community just a couple of days ago, and I said, this hurts, right? Because I went through this pain so many years ago, but everybody cried about no programs. And then I sat there and pointed out every single program or every other block in this district. So it's not about no programs. It's about what's appropriate for our community and why the kids are not going in. Right? So it's all kind of stuff that lead to where I am today, but it all makes sense.
Let me touch on that, because most research will tell you that there's a direct correlation between poverty and gun violence, for the most part. And,
Yeah, no doubt.
And that there's a sense of hopelessness in our community, quite frankly, because a lot of people just don't believe that anything's being done.
Because no one's doing anything.
What role can you play in changing that dynamic?
And I think a big piece of that is when you elect people to office that get it
Right.
and that come from what you have gone through.
Right.
We have a lot of elected officials that are great in their advocacy and
Right.
great in allocating money, right? But they don't really understand what the folks are going through. So we have a lot of people that have did tours of NYCHA, right?
Tell me about it.
Everybody went into the NYCHA developments, But the residents said to me, Alika, it feels like we are animals in a zoo when people come to our
Exactly.
developments. And they can't stand when there are tours. They like the fact that there's media attention
Right.
with NYCHA. They like the fact that now people are talking about allocating money. And they like to be able to point to different problems, but they don't like the camera.
Right.
That's intrusive, but it has to be done, right?
Yeah.
And so, but the politicians that do that and use that as a platform to continue to run for office are the ones that don't get it, right? And that's the problem. And so now you have, in me and some of the other elected officials that are coming into office, people that grew up in the middle of the hood, people that grew up in public housing, people that, had real life experiences.
But you also have some that's forgetting that they come from public housing and they get themselves caught up, which I'm glad you're not one of those people, because actually I cut my teeth in public housing working for the adjacent council district, council member Priscilla Wooten at the time. And I started my advocacy work there, and I sort of kind of correlate that with how you've built the foundation to put yourself in this position. What I want to ask you on this is now, having upwards of about 18 some housing developments in your district.
26.
26 now, okay. And whatnot. Numbers, right? With that being said, truth be told, everybody has recognized Brownsville, quote unquote, when you go to Mother Gaston and Sutter, they call that the belly of the beast. And sadly, it had earned that name about 10, 15 years ago under the Boylan administration. And whatnot. However, with what you're positioned to do right now, you are now the head of the NYCHA Public Housing Committee. What can you do with that committee to move your district and this city, forward?
Besides having these oversight hearings, right? That's
Well, they're
and I
important.
think
We need them. Right.
those are great and a great opportunity to pull the cover up, right? And you've done a fine job with helping with some of that information, right? I appreciate that. I know, right? But utilizing not just the oversight hearings, but using my platform to go into not just my community, but go into all these other communities, all these other districts as the chair of public housing. And I've been having private meetings with all of the resident leaders and the residents. And the conversation now moves from the height of all of the problems to this is what we need to do on the ground. This is how we need to organize and mobilize. And you spoke a little while ago about like a serious voting block, right? Looking at the residents and saying, listen, people are listening to you now and they see you, they hear you. Now organize this into a real serious voting block.
Well, that's interesting because they are.
And that's the great thing about what's happening. Out of tragedy, some good things come out.
Right.
And so we've been having these organizing meetings, but also when you look at the shift, with so much going on, the conversation now is, well, there's so many problems in NYCHA, it's time to just tear them down. $32 billion in capital repairs, we can never meet that need. So we need to have a real conversation about tearing down. That's what the people are saying, right? And so, but the residents didn't think that we would get to this conversation. They thought it was just, okay, we'll get money for the repairs, not to demolish our homes. And so now the conversation is, okay, we need to really talk about how we even articulate what is happening, right? And then force the elected officials and the politicians in government to do all these different fixes and really turn things around and allow the residents to be able to be like managers in this process. Because now HUD is involved, right? To a real low level, HUD is right there on the ground. And we can look at the HUD dollars even through the TPA funds. Even when you look at the HUD regulations that speak to residents becoming their own management companies. When we look at RAD and the converting of Section 8 developments Section 9 into Section 8, the residents can manage their buildings now. So we need to have real conversations about not just empowering the community and having a voting block, but coming up with real companies and organizations and management structures to really take over the buildings, because we're there now, and that's where we can go. But it's I don't see that happening in that conversation taking place across the board with all the leaders, but utilizing my position to have that conversation and the residents see that it's real.
We're going to come back on that privatizing stuff. I want to talk about that. We'll be right back.
I still don't know quite how to feel. Because from the day I started is when the cold season hit. And when they handed me the keys to my office, I walked into the district office and all the pipes burst. And then the very next day is when I started getting calls from the NYCHA residents about no heat and hot water.
Oh, no.
And so it's been a whirlwind, to say the least. But I'm up for the challenge, and I'm thankful for being in the position to be that voice and do something.
You know, I wanted to touch a little bit before we move on to the next question about this whole privatization concept. And I know that there was some concern with you having the ability to communicate, not you having the problem, but the residents having the ability to understand what you're presenting so that they would be alarmed and or informed about what's coming down the pipe. What would you speak to with regards to RAD and all that other stuff? And explain to viewers what RAD is.
So right now, so RAD, it's an opportunity for NYCHA to be able to, and not just NYCHA, this is public housing across the entire country, right? And this is something that was implemented by President Barack Obama in 2011.
Section 8 involved. Yeah.
So this is really about the converging of public housing developments, public housing units into Section 8 units.
Now, RAD spelled resident, what does that stand for again?
Rental
assistance?
demonstration.
Right, okay.
Rental assistance demonstration. And like I said, it allows for funding for developments to go from Section 9 public housing to Section 8, right? And so let's say a person makes $10,000 a year, right? With public housing, that unit itself, that public housing unit, you pay a third of your, 30% of your income, right? But when you go to a Section 8 unit, the Section 8 unit, the rent for that particular development it could be market rate, it could be whatever it is for that area, but there's a Section 8 voucher. So the tenant will still pay 30% of their rent, but the unit itself could be more, right? So it's that Section 8 voucher. And so what public housing authorities are going through across the country is converting their units into Section 8 units because there's more funding from HUD for Section 8. No one's putting money into public housing units anymore. And so in New York, the old Edgemere houses in Far Rockaway, Queens, Ocean Bay is the new name, and that's our first like RAD conversion. But in my district, we've had some similar ones with Saratoga Square.
Saratoga Square. I used to live down the street. Yeah.
And so L&M, so that when we talk about privatization, so L&M did a deal with NYCHA. So L&M came in and took over that development.
Yeah, and the construction they did on is phenomenal.
It is. And so they renovated the apartments, the exterior and the interior apartments, and so now CNC Management, they manage the development and is no longer NYCHA.
Let me just go off the script real quick. So, what are your thought processes with regards to hearing that all this development has taken place and the city is actually, I'm sure the city's putting some money into these projects, correct? Or affording the opportunity for the developers to have some type of
affording the opportunity for private developers.
But here's my problem. We have $10 billion that they found to create jails and build brand new jails that look like these super dorms, that can go to Yale and all those other places. But yet we don't have $10 billion to fix up the developments. What's your thought on that?
So, but that's the priority of our government, right? That they would, again, renovate and fix up jails and not care about the average resident and make sure that they're protected so that they don't have to go into a system of criminal justice or anything else. So my whole thought is always take care of home first. But that goes back to what I have going on in my own community now, right? Crossroads is right here in my backyard, literally the backyard of my office, my district office.
The vein of your district right now.
Yes. And what was that supposed to be? Crossroads was supposed to be a high school, right? We never had a traditional high school in Brownsville. The children in Brownsville went to Jeff in East New York, or they went to the High in Bed-Stuy,
or they wound up in Crossroads.
Or no, at the time they went to Spofford.
Okay, right.
And so
that created the need.
That created the need.
Right.
And so the community said 20 years ago, we need a high school, and designated where the high school should go. And then the administration came and said, you have more of your young people in Spofford, that the need is for your own detention center. And so they decided to no longer continue with the implementation of a high school on East New York and Bristol, and they decided that we needed a jail. But that was the priority. And so you see the same thing here now. The priorities is always around criminal justice. And let me just say this one other thing. With Raise the Age, right? And this is a totally different topic. We're talking about NYCHA, right?
Go ahead. You on a roll, so I'm going to let you go.
I get wild up. You know this about me. With this implementation of Raise the Age, the children from Horizon have already been transferred to Crossroad, right? And so we have a facility, 444 Thomas Boylan, which is a multi-purpose center.
It used to be the community board.
Which used, and so the community board is where I danced when I was 6 years old, and Ayanla Van Zant was my dance teacher, right? This building has always been known as a multi-purpose center, a community-based center. That's where you go for information. My mother signed me up for Fresh Air Fund in this building. This administration, or the powers that be, when they were talking about Raise the Age, decided that that building should be a criminal justice facility. It should be a community court. You have a community court on one side.
That started under the Bloomberg administration, because I know that there was some pushback from your predecessor.
Yes, and the pushback from the community.
Right.
So she was the voice of the people, right. In that debate. So you have a building that was slated to be a court across the street from the 73rd Precinct, across the street from the Juvenile Justice Center, right?
Because parole was supposed to be in here.
The parole is there now.
Okay.
Right?
But I thought it was all about the whole concept with regards to the fact they were bringing that in because they didn't want young people jumping the turnstiles when they didn't have Metro cards to go see their probation officer or whatever the case may be. So the Bloomberg, in their conventional wisdom, thought that this would be the best place to bring it so that these young people wouldn't get arrested again based on the practices of trying to get to the, to see their parole or probation.
The best thing for children is to get them out of their 4-block radius. The best thing for children is to get them out of their community. The best thing for our children is to get them downtown or get them to Manhattan or get them out of the community, not being like a haven for everything that you need right here. And so that area was starting to look like and feel like a criminal justice corridor. Lock them up on Pickens Avenue, lock them up on the train station. They can go through this court right here, go take them across the street to the jail.
Put them across Crossroads.
Right?
Wow.
And so again, what is that? The priorities, right? And so just 2 days ago, I'm coming down the street and I see ACS and Department of Design and Construction in front of 444 doing a whole scoping plan with architects, because now they want to create a whole transportation hub at 444 Thomas Boylan, right? But we're talking about housing, right? We're talking about the need for capital repair needs in our public housing developments, right? But we're now spending millions of dollars for a transportation hub at 444 Thomas Boylan.
All right, so clear this up, because
it
sounds definitely that this administration definitely has their priorities, not in tune with the community. Let's just be real about it.
Well, not in tune with this community.
Well overall, that's,
maybe somebody else's community.
Communities, all of the communities that mirror the makeup of this structure. I guess my question would be, and maybe you can clear it up because we had the conversation, you guys are elected officials, what have you. You guys have the ability to sit down with, quote unquote, the government relations people in the mayor's office and say to the mayor, look, we need to sit down. Now, it was rumored you were supported by him. Now, what stops you from having that ability to have his ear if he thought it enough to get behind you, if that were the case, and you getting things done?
Well, this is, at the end of the day, it's all politics, right? And
politics.
And so I can pick up the phone and I can call maybe his chief of staff, right? I can pick up the phone and call all of his advisors and everyone else that's running around City Hall. When I go into the building, they go to the left, I go to the right. But at the end of the day, it's okay, we've had this conversation, now I need you to move on it. And I get a lot of, councilwoman, I didn't know this was happening. Don't think this is the administration. Sometimes these agencies are just doing their own thing. We'll get to the bottom of it.
Well, the agencies are supervised by the very commissioners that the mayor appoints.
And 7 months into being in the seat, that's what I'm figuring out.
Interesting. Now, you actually got support of a person I hold dearly. Not only is he my frat brother, but also my former boss, Congressman Towns. You guys both went to the same university and what have you. That's why he got behind you, because you was at Aggie and whatnot. And I know what he instilled in us to go out there and do the job to represent him as the leader, as the congressional member and as the politician. But my concern is, what's your plan? And what have you. Now, what do you propose to do to go out there and be responsive and deliver for the people that have elected you, and those that haven't but still need your leadership?
And what I say to that is not what I'm going to do, is what I've been doing. Right? I was fighting NYCHA 10 years ago when I was a community organizer with real actions against NYCHA. And 10 years ago, we were talking about the health standards in our developments. 10 years ago, we were talking about mold. We did a town hall here with the NYCHA residents 2 years ago. And there was no one from the city council that was there. There was no one from the administration that was there. This is with NYCHA and Department of Health right here in Van Dyke.
When you lived, I'm not to cut you off, when you lived in the developments, how hard was it for you to get the result of getting things fixed? and what have
It was different back then.
Okay.
Like you were able to call your manager and your super, and they would come upstairs and fix things back then.
Do you think it's
It
because
was-
of the administration? Is that what the craziness is, or?
I think it's just a culture of because there was so many years of folks not caring about NYCHA.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, a lot of the people that work there, I'm talking about just on the ground, just like the caretakers and the maintenance workers and the HPTs and, you know, folks that are providing the service, so many
Right.
of them are NYCHA residents themselves. And so we tend to lose that in the conversation. And you go to work every single day, and then you go back home. You go to work and people are disrespecting you. You go home
Right.
and, you know, your family, they know what's happening, but it's just it created an environment where people have just lost hope, even the
Right.
workers. And so a real change is going to come with real people and real leaders in place that
Right.
care, and the residents and the workers to have faith in that leader. Kind of almost like when President Obama came into office. He
Right.
gave us all like hope.
Right.
He gave us all an opportunity to see something different in government. And you kind of see that wave going across the country now. It's some real hard.
Just in this state alone, let me tell you, I've talked
You
to a
know,
number of
but-
housing developments in the
But
state.
the change, you see a change coming, and I think with leadership in place and really pulling the community together and lifting up their voice and empowering them to go forward and,
Right.
and be the force behind it all, I think that's when we'll start to see real change. But with me, I'm going to continue to do what I've been doing, but now that I'm in office, I can actually sit at the table and allocate dollars to this particular cause.
Let's talk about money. And we hear everybody saying it's going to take billions, it's going to take billions. And then you hear the mayor say it's really not his responsibility to fix NYCHA. I'm a little confused by that. But at the end of the day, where's the congressional members? We've not heard a lot from them. And what have you. Would that be something that you would co-sign the thought process of? Because
Well, you know what? We haven't heard a lot from them because they're in Washington, D.C. They're fighting 45 down in D.C. But if you kind of stay in tune with what Congress is doing, like just a couple of weeks ago, they stood on the steps of City Hall and announced the advocacy around the $1 trillion infrastructure bill.
But that was sort of kind of like a
speaks to-
Johnny-come-lately thing after everybody has been out already.
But but I can't say that because when HUD put out, when Trump put out his American, a real American budget, remember it spoke directly to $8 billion in cuts, right? And our congressional members actually submitted their own appropriations bill demanding that money be replaced. And so they did their budget dance on Capitol Hill, and that money was put back into the budget. And so we don't see it a lot because they're not local, and you know you can't feel and touch them, right? And I think it's up to their staffers to come back and let us know what's happening, and maybe there's a little level of disconnect or lack of communication.
that could be the case.
On that
could be the
part.
case.
But they're fighting the fight.
Because when we represented Congressman Towns, we made sure that he had all the information necessary, so he wasn't left out there, open and not being able to talk to the residents. So it does come down to I would co-sign that thought process. It does come down to amiable staff. I mean, you've worked for an elected official. You worked for Latrice at one point, right? Am I not mistaken? In an assembly.
I worked for 2 council members in the past. I was legislative aide. I was
Right.
a constituent services manager, and I worked as chief
So
of
you
staff
get
to the
it. So
state
you get
assembly.
it.
Yeah,
And
and the federal government. I was a staffer in the federal government. So yeah.
Okay. So let's say this. Now, going back to that conversation where people keep talking about money, de Blasio was even quoted as saying, yeah, the residents need billions. They need billions. But then he turns around and he says, they need what we can afford to give them. When that statement was made, and what have you, how do you think residents should have actually taken that? Because I think a lot of them were offended.
I don't know. I don't know if you remember, but when he made that statement, he was at a press conference outside at the same exact time. We were doing he was at a press conference at 1PP, and we were doing our hearing against NYCHA, our oversight hearing with NYCHA on that same day. And it was me who actually said, the mayor just made this statement. I stopped the hearing and I said, the mayor just stated, and we heard the audience. It was loud and clear how the audience felt. And I asked NYCHA, how do you actually asked Shola? I said, what do you think about what the mayor just said?
Right.
Right? And so it was disheartening. But again, that goes to show when you're not from a certain community, sometimes you just don't get it.
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up because actually I really wasn't going to go there. But with regards to Shola, do you think
talk too much, right?
Do you think she was a quote unquote? She just fell on the sword and just took the responsibility of a failed administration that didn't back her?
I think that Shola was put in a position where she did not make some of the best decisions and relied on too many of her executives as opposed to the people. And it was to the detriment of residents and herself. And so I think she did fall on the sword. However, I think with hindsight, she should have, I'm sure she's like just kicking herself about some of the decisions she's made based on some of the information that her immediate circle provided her, including the former general counsel.
Do you think their activities borderline criminal, given the fact that here it is, you lied to the federal government, and at the end of the day, the thought process was, oh, it's only 19 kids that were affected, and this is the mayor now talking, that it was only 19 kids affected, but yet at the end of the day, they're all right, thank God, nobody's hurt, only to come to find out it was 820 in the next report based on the Daily News report, and actually subjugated to the thought process that there might even be thousands at this point.
So I truly believe that the actions of anybody who was involved with misrepresentation, with falsifying information in documents, that is criminal. That's criminal behavior. And whenever you you involve yourself in criminal activity, in criminal behavior, you should be punished, right? And you should go to jail. And so I think that until people are held accountable for those actions, the residents themselves will feel as though they have not been heard and no one is being held accountable. And the folks that are continuing to lie to us, even today, with the water situation in Brevoort, when people continue to lie to us, they will continue to do that until someone is punished. You know, and so punishment is, if the intent is there, I think that people should be punished.
Councilmember Malika Ampry, we'll be right back.
And so we're in office to make sure that we benefit from every single thing that's coming up in this community, every single bit of it. If they out here building it, we need to be on the jobs, on the sites, working. And when it's over, when the building is up, we need to be working in the developments. We need to be working in those buildings. We need to be living in those buildings. We need to be managing those buildings and all of the commercial space and retail that's coming up around the developments. We need to be owning those businesses. We need to be doing everything because we are in a position, and this is an opportunity for us to develop our communities and build it for us.
You know, I want to talk a little bit about how folks in our housing developments in our community are looking to work. The city of New York has not been for a long time, and I'm talking about at least more 5 to 10 years, has not been in compliance with Section 3 laws, the federal mandate of Section 3. How do you and the council look to get around that, and would you commit to having hearings to determine how we can get our people employed based on that?
Well, first off, 100% yes.
Okay,
I'll have a hearing around Section 8. Right.
Section 3. I know we still talk about public housing. I know you like
Section 3.
It's all related, so.
Section 3 with the employment of the residents. I remember a time when you would see like the construction workers or construction happening in developments. You see scaffolding going up, and then the residents will always say, "Hey, I want to work. What's going on? What's happening?" And we were always told that, oh, the residents are not skilled, or they don't have the experiences or certificates or training that's needed for this particular job.
Right.
But then you would have another conversation with the residents and say, no, we do. Well, we have a list of people. But you would go back to NYCHA or even just the city of New York, and they'll say, well, we don't have that same list. We don't have that information. And so I'm committed to making sure that they have all that. Okay. And in fact, I recently worked with Central Brooklyn Economic Development Corporation, LaShawn Muhammad's group, and we came up with a full list of everyone in our community right now that have OSHA trainings
Right.
to if they're qualified, experienced electricians and plumbers, and we have that list ready to go. So
Right.
whenever we get to a developer or anyone who is starting some kind of project in our community, we're like, okay, no, here you go.
Well,
You
how
can't
do you work
hire from
around
here.
that when the mayor cut a P&L agreement with the
The
unions?
PLAs.
Yeah, you know, with that being the case, how do you work around that when a lot of the folks aren't getting the jobs? And I want to I'll follow that up with, we have an organization that is basically interested in sitting down with the likes of a person like yourself, 700 Strong, who does this whole big thing around Section 3 and has a plan, just that the mayor's not allowing them to present that because, you know, this is the kind of attitude he takes. That, you know, if it's not his idea, it's the highway at this point. How do we institute that and get that kind of, you know, moving?
You know, and that's interesting because I've had conversations with the unions about the PLAs and
Right.
working with NYCHA, and then I've had conversations again with what, you know, used to be coalitions
The coalition,
from back in
right,
the days,
right.
right? And so those are real conversations. You know, I'm supportive of unions, right? And I'll always be. But I've also had conversations to say when there is an opportunity to work, my people in my community are not working.
No, they're not.
Right?
They're
And
not.
so when you have these certain exclusive agreements with unions, that continues to help just those particular members of those particular unions. But that doesn't speak to the need to hire our local residents who
Right.
can still be, you know, able to work on these different jobs. And so for me, the focus and even the enforcement of the Section 3 laws
Right.
should be in place. And so it's, you have a law that exists, but the enforcement around it to make sure that government is adhering to those rules that are in place. And so my focus would be the actual Section 3
Right.
and not necessarily working exclusively with the unions and
Right.
the PLAs. Again, my people need to work. My people need to eat. And my focus is on.
Well, again, I'd like the opportunity to introduce you to 700 Strong. It's definitely an amiable organization
Yeah,
that would, you know, that is about, you know, making sure that our people have the training necessary to go do these jobs.
And if you have some lists, let me know.
Okay, they got
I
it
need
all.
those.
You know, let's actually transition to that, because when we're talking about skilled workers, what we find a lot of issues are of late is particularly the lead issue. And that's because the government, or quote unquote the city, has been hiring people who are not as skilled and basically have not gone to do the job correctly, thus now creating an atmosphere of lying to the federal government that they did the job and they didn't do the job. So with the whole thing of lead and the strings of excuses coming out of City Hall, how do we get around that so that we can safeguard the health of our young babies in these housing developments going forward?
Okay, and that kind of goes back to the unions too, because I've had meetings with DC9, I've had meetings with the painters and
Right.
and other folks who have a whole team, a whole group of individuals who are skilled, who can go in and do the remediation and like do the entire job, but they're not necessarily the ones that are working with NYCHA. And at the end of the day, for me, we need to make sure that our children are healthy, right? And when you look at the numbers that came out recently, the numbers are very low,
Talked about that.
and they're not true, right? I can't say they're not true, but come on, I'm 42 years old. I don't even know I'm supposed to say my age like that, right? I'm 42. I got a cousin that's 45, and when we were younger, she was eating chip paint in Farragut houses, right? And she had lead poisoning.
Right.
And my cousin, to this day, is a little challenged developmentally. She never was able to hit those milestones when we were growing up. And to this day, she does not function as an adult on the levels that other adults function. And that's because of lead poisoning.
Right.
Lead paint poisoning in NYCHA development. So this is nothing new, right? But my point is, I know it's not 18 kids
Right.
because my cousin from back in the day had lead poisoning.
Exactly.
Right?
Several thousand,
And,
quite frankly.
and so we don't know the numbers. And so we need to make sure that we just really get an account of what's happening in the development, in the walls, in the buildings, and be able to have an exclusive focus, which came out of the monitor,
Right.
right? And that's what the federal government is talking about now, and that's what the courts are talking about now, and that's where there's a whole bunch of lawsuits flying around
Right.
behind it. And so it's really getting to a point where identifying the buildings and having a team ready to go into those particular buildings. We know the
Right.
people that are in place, and so it's really holding, and I can't even say NYCHA accountable because you can't do that anymore.
Well,
it's
can
making
we
sure
de-
that the monitor is
Can
in
we
place.
even depend on the city and trust that they're going to go do the due diligence necessary
No,
in one
that-
for these testing? Because they've lied already.
No.
It will not.
And that's why there's a need for a federal monitor.
Right.
And that's why there's a need to make sure that the residents are working with the federal monitor
Right.
and reporting directly to the federal monitor. And that's why HUD is involved.
But do you
that's-
support independent lead testing with regard? I know some of your colleagues.
Yes.
Senator Levine.
Oh, absolutely.
Senator Jesse Hamilton. Some of these folks are actually sending out mobile units to go around and do the
Ab-
testing. My organization, Housing Residents First, we're preparing to mount up to do something similar to that as well.
Yes.
With one of the medical facilities. So is that something you would
Yes.
engage in?
So not only will I engage in and be supportive, but I would also look at even my financial allocations, my budget allocations, being able to utilize what the resources that I could receive
Right.
within my council district to go towards that as well.
Right, because
So
I mean, you've got a lot of
absolutely.
developments, and it definitely needs to. And some of the older buildings, like Brownsville houses, you
Yeah.
know, or what have you. So they're more subjected to this kind of pain, if you want to call it. Let's talk about gentrification real quick and whatnot. I mean, I used to live right there on Saratoga between McDonough and Decatur and what have you. And I've seen the transition in the 8 years that I've lived there, quite frankly. And now seeing that it's spreading. And not only is it spreading from that aspect into Ocean Hill, straight into Brownsville and what have you. What do we do to stop or slow that down so that the residents who live here have an opportunity? Because I know you're big on home ownership and what have you. How do we get our folks into home ownership in your district?
So right now we have an opportunity working with organizations like Habitat for Humanity, right? We have some really decent organizations that are coming in and partnering with HPD, partnering with the city to renovate and rehab some of our buildings and empty lots to provide that level of home ownership. And when I go into meetings with this administration, I speak to that.
Right.
You know, for me, it's not just affordable housing, low income housing.
Right.
For me, a real community is mixed income community. For me, it's theaters, it's shopping, it's entertainment, it's restaurants and good retail, right?
Right.
And open space and parks. So that makes a real community.
Right.
And so that's my focus. And I can tell you now, remember Nehemiah Homes,
Yeah.
right? East Brooklyn Congregation. We have companies that came in and purchased the Nehemiah Homes. They knocked down the first one on Powell Street. And the renderings for what's about to come will probably won't blow your mind. You already know what it is, right? And so we have another one that came and purchased 4 Nehemiah Homes side by side. We know the writing is on the wall. But when you look at the zoning for this district, it's all R6. How in the world can you have a community of single family homes
When you're allowed to go
zoned
up.
for R6?
Yeah.
And no one looked at that and said, wait a
Like, hold on,
minute,
what's going on here?
we need to downzone this area? Really? And so the first conversation that I had when I looked at the maps, because the families are losing their homes.
Now, for the
right?
purposes of my view, is R6 means they have the ability to build up to 6 floors.
Yes.
Right.
Well, in some instances, it could be 8.
Okay.
And so, so the first meeting I had with land use, right, in this administration was in city planning. I would like to rezone all around the single family homes down to just something lower, right? Oh, okay, Councilwoman. But when you downzone, you have to upzone. So what are you willing to give? And that's a real conversation, right? And so when we talk about gentrification, we started out with NYCHA and we talked about RAD, right? In order to penetrate the Brownsville community,
Right.
you have to do something with the NYCHA developments. No one wants to go into a house right next to a housing development. So what do? You demolish
The housing
the
development.
housing development.
Yep.
And that's what's in play right now. That's where folks behind the closed doors are talking.
So what do you do?
So you stop that,
Well,
right?
how do you do that?
So,
Do you create your own political machine
So
because that they're going to come for you if in fact that you want to do that, and you know the developers are making their moves, and right now we live in a real estate driven city, and everybody's getting something out of those those checkbooks, if you want to say that. How do you protect yourself and be able to serve and do what you need to do in your district?
So and this is a conversation that had to be had with my family, with the community,
Right.
folks that elected me. I have to be true to who I am,
Right.
right? And so people need to know the truth. People need to know what's about to happen or what could happen. And so I have to continue to have meetings with the community. I continue to have my town hall meetings. I continue to meet with block associations, with tenant associations, explaining what the possibilities could be. But how do you fix it? Well, if you want to down zone and you have to up zone, right? There are areas in this community that could be up zoned, right? And they could be up zoned to benefit us. We can look at areas that are all maybe C4s and look at them as, okay, instead of just commercial, what would it look like if this was manufacturing, right? With some kind of overlay of a R6, right?
Right. We got a whole lot of that in the Brownsville area.
Yeah, and so when you start looking at the Belmont areas going into the
industrial
but there
park.
we go. There's opportunity there. But now having a communication, lines of communication open with the community to show them what the possibilities are,
Right.
we can really benefit. But it's going to take a lot and a heavy lift and a whole learning curve. But with a lot of the media attention that's happening now and Brownsville on Front Street,
Oh yeah.
lights,
Totally.
camera, action, it has to happen.
And,
now.
and with that, and having 500,000 people that live in public housing, not just Brownsville, all around, like even in the Bronx and whatnot, how do we get them into these homes? Do we start programming? Do we start to how do we massage their mindset to get them saying that this is what I can achieve and what have you because I've got the right leadership in the city council?
I did a workshop last week around financial management,
Okay.
right? And it was to have a conversation with the community about how to get prepared
Right.
for the housing applications, the home ownership applications.
Right.
I had a sister say to me, well, Alika, I make $36,000 a year. I'm looking at the incomes that are on the screen and I don't qualify. This is ridiculous. They need to come down. I said, sister, you make $36,000 a year. You're not in a position right now to purchase a home. But what you can do is connect with maybe your sister or your brother or somebody else and build together, right? Or let's talk about your job. What can we do to help you increase your salary, increase your revenue,
To get you
right?
qualified.
To get you qualified. And so those are the conversations that we also have with the community, like looking at different skill sets. Even
Right.
in the NYCHA developments, look at the Food Business Pathways program.
Right.
You have some amazing chefs that are coming out of public housing. They just had a whole launch and tasting party on the Manhattan High Line. The amount of skills when I walked around the High Line with all of those NYCHA residents from across the 5 boroughs, a sister baking ridiculous goods out of Staten Island, right? The skill set is there, but it's about somebody pouring into them, right? And allowing them to have spaces where they can highlight their own creativity. And so we need to continue to support our residents, support our community, provide financial incentives to people, build folks' skill sets, and just, again, provide that level of hope and knowing that they have somebody in office that actually cares and want to help them get to the next level. And so I think the opportunities are there. I just got to keep consistent and make sure that the people know what's happening.
Now are you putting any business incubators together? I think one of the greatest examples of what's happening in Brownsville is the Black Cats and whatnot, and the work that those young ladies are doing over there, the 3 Black Cats, that is. Are there any other plans in your mindset that you're going to be helping to develop more programs like that?
Absolutely. And those sisters come out of NYCHA.
Right.
And I don't know, when I
Right.
lived in 1400 East New York Avenue, Marcus Garvey lived in 6A. I lived in apartment 6A. The sisters lived in 6K.
There you go.
So I've been knowing them for years, and they moved to Prospect.
Right.
And their drive was the buildings came down, and they wanted to do something about it.
Right.
And those sisters were the first group of women to do outreach to the former Prospect Plaza residents around financial management in order for their applications to be ready for the Prospect Plaza that just came up.
Right.
Right? And so, again, that was providing them with an opportunity in a space. And look where they are today, owning their own business, 3 Black Cats. But
Actually,
just
they actually were in the black for in their second year open.
Yeah. And but two blocks down, you have the Brownsville Community Culinary Center, BCC, where Kraus Meyer, who was a Danish chef, an investor, came out and he built this amazing building. And they provide training opportunities for residents to come in, and it's like 11-week program, everything from restaurant management to cooking and prepping and being a line chef and cook, and placing them in different restaurants, right?
Yeah.
But I need to continue to be supportive of those types of organizations, right? And I just talked about the Food Business Pathways, supporting the local chefs with space here in our community. And so when we talk about zoning and rezoning and what makes a real community, I'm looking at Pitkin Avenue, I'm looking at Utica Avenue, Church Avenue, Belmont, Rutland Road, between East 98th Street all the way down to Utica Avenue. There's so many opportunities to develop these spaces where our own local entrepreneurs can benefit from.
Nice.
And the opportunity is there. The new commissioner with SBS, Bishop, he's on board.
Okay.
So there's some people that care right now in city government, and we're having our private meetings.
Put that out there now.
Y'all gonna have to
You have
tweak that one.
infiltrators
Take
now.
do a tape when this part.
We've got a lot of people coming in tonight. I want to go back to that real quick. Well, I mean, it's all related. But here we got a lot of people now, and I think you said it at the top of the hour, with regards to folks who are now finding that NYCHA exists, and they're using this as an opportunity because the cameras are on, i.e. Cynthia Nixon. And whatnot. And she was even quoted as saying something to the effect of, if I'm not mistaken, I had it here, that her, that we have to go build up these communities because people in NYCHA are suffering. But she's never stepped foot inside a NYCHA development until that day she had that press conference, which I actually made a point of it in a video that I want to show right now.
Mike, check this. Mike, check this. Cynthia is a liar. She lied in our community. Come on, man. She is a liar. She lied to people in public housing. Come on, man. Come on. Let me get my phone out. She told about the cops. Let's give him I want to be heard. They loud, I want to be loud. They got a mic, I got a mic. She's a liar. She's a liar. She lied to people in public housing. I need that. What's up? Yo, give me my phone number, man. She's a liar. She's a liar. I'll go to jail for people in public housing anytime. You're a liar. You lied to people in public housing just like you lied to us.
Yeah, so that was sort of kind of me getting arrested because I went to a presser that she had in Bushwick, and she was there with your colleague Antonio Reynoso, and they were basically out there talking about education, which was cool. My thing was first and foremost, how can we trust that this woman is going to do exactly what she's saying here when she didn't follow through when she made that visit to the NYCHA developments, particularly over there in Albany houses with the borough president, and made all these statements and primarily using that as a means to position herself to go after the governor, but yet she hadn't come back to say anything to these people once the information got out about the lead or once the information got out about the lack of repairs. So again, it was my position to go over there and say, look, people, stop buying into this stuff.
Wow.
If we don't have effective leaders, if we don't have effective elected officials, and I give you your kudos because you're doing something and what have you, but those that aren't have to be called out. And that was why I got arrested in that particular position, and I'll do it again. Actually, I plan on doing it again, truth be told.
I'm sure you
So
will.
hey, look, they got a cell with my name on it. But for NYCHA people, I'll do that. I don't have a problem doing that because it's an ends to a cause and what have you to bring about the attention and the awareness. And if we can get more people like you in position so that we can address these kind of things, then I think we can make some progress. And that's the goal. And that was one of the reasons why I started the organization Housing Residents First. And we're moving across the entire city. Right now, we have about 500 people on the street doing petitions right now to create a line for housing residents to have their own political line and want to vote their interests.
That's hot.
what's happening today.
That's dope.
So that's conversations we should definitely have, given the proactiveness that you're doing with NYCHA. And I believe you to be genuine with it. I don't think it's just politics for you, as it is for some others. And what have you. And if it is, I'll be rallying out in front of your door too.
I know you will.
But with regards to your position, again, and And I had a question from a young lady who lives over in Brevoort Houses who had questioned, and I told her I was going to have this meeting with you. So her question was, as in your position as a committee head, is it more difficult than you thought it would be?
Yes. I can only speak the truth, right?
Right.
It's who I am, and that's why people like me, and that's why people actually like me. Yes, it's more difficult, but not the work itself, the politics around it. And I say that because no matter how, I'm the chair of public housing, and let's just go back to the first hearing.
Right.
The first hearing was about the water crisis, right?
Right.
The heat and hot water crisis. And that was the first hearing of the year, right?
Oh, yeah, you got thrown right in.
And with that, if you remember, I had the residents speak first,
Right.
which is not something that
Yeah, they always let all
We
the
do.
agencies and everybody go forward. yeah.
exactly. And so I said, no, we are not going to have the agencies speak first, because when the agencies finish talking,
Everybody's
all
gone.
the cameras pick up and
And they
leave.
leave.
You're going to sit here and you're going to listen to
The people.
each and every resident that we choose to sit there and say something. And I was told, you can't do that. That's not what we do. Up until about maybe 10 o'clock the night before,
Right.
I was called and was said, and was, it was suggested that I tweak it to allow the agency head to speak. And if I didn't, how about I allow her to speak for as long as she would like to speak? Because if you remember, not only did the residents speak first, I only gave the chair 2 minutes,
Right.
which is also unprecedented. And so I got a lot of backlash because of that, a ton of it, from a lot of people, right?
Right.
But the residents said, Alika, thank you so much. Can you keep doing it?
But isn't that the only people that matter?
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's difficult because of the politics.
So it's said that it takes some time to really get acclimated when you're a first termer and what have you. Are you happy with what you've been able to achieve thus far? And are you setting your sights forward to say this second term is going to be even hotter?
Absolutely.
I'm just putting it in that frame.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's been an amazing 7 months.
Right.
We've did a lot. I've had 4 hearings so far, and after the heat and hot water crisis, I had one on management,
Right.
right? And I had a town hall on the consent decree, right?
Right.
And that was supposed to be at the same time as RAD. We postponed RAD because of the consent decree town hall. But I'm about to have one on RAD in September.
You also did something with Lisa Evers, correct?
I did.
Right, you did
I
a
did.
town
I
hall
did.
there,
And we
right.
did a town hall with Lisa Evers. And so for me, I'm just getting started, and it's been this is not what is it? It's not a sprint.
Right.
It's a
It's a marathon.
right? And so I'm taking this in stride, and I'm doing enough
Got it.
across the.
So, in your last words, where we go from here?
Oh man. Right now we are at, I think, the crossroads, right? And either everything can collapse and crumble before us, or we can utilize this time to make the residents of all Black and brown low-income communities the true voice of this city, because they are the city of New York,
Right.
right? And so I think where we're headed is in the direction where our people are actually going to rise. Like just the working class grit of this city, it's time for them to benefit and prosper.
I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you.
Councilmember Alika Ampry. So here we are, right here in the heart of Brownsville, Brooklyn, US of A. And there you have it. Here at the Morning Stretch, a frank and honest conversation with City Councilwoman Alika Ampry Samuel, chair of the committee overseeing the New York City Housing Authority, a girl from Marcus Garvey Projects done good. Alika Ampry Samuels is our first elected politician currently in office from outside of the Bronx who had the heart to come on our show and answer the difficult questions. So you have to ask yourself, why haven't these other politicians from Manhattan, Brooklyn, Staten Island, and Queens had the heart to come on our show as well and address your concerns? Why? Because most of these politicians have had the heart to speak candidly about the issues and confront, quite frankly, the corruption of the de Blasio administration. But Councilwoman Samuel did, and we at the Morning Stretch applaud her. She discussed the lead poisoning cover-up in New York City housing. She talked about how in her district they converted what was supposed to be a brand new high school to educate our youth into what is now the juvenile justice facility, Crossroads, which is only there to incarcerate them. How many of you knew that? And people are proposing they tear down New York City housing. Why? Because in the world of gentrification, no new homeowner wants to live next to public housing. I'm not talking about black and brown new homeowners either. So join me in my organization, Housing Residents First, as well as people like Councilwoman Samuel in fighting this very difficult fight against Mayor de Blasio and the real estate lobby, who don't give a damn about working class people or the residents of New York City housing. And remember this, if you don't say anything when they come after your neighbor, there will be no one left when they come after you.